Hey everyone, this is IM3, Unit 5, Notes number 12. We're going over something called coterminal angles. Go ahead and write this down here. Press play whenever you're ready, okay? So, the whole idea is you want to know what a coterminal angle is, and you want to be able to find it, okay? So, just to give you an idea. Okay, when you think about the x and y axis, when you make an angle, I'll use this color here. You start off on the positive x-axis. This right here is called your initial side. Okay? And then your angle opens up this way, and eventually it stops. Well, that was weird. Let's try that again. Then it opens up, and then you stop somewhere. This is called your terminal side, because terminal just means the end, right? Okay, and together it creates this angle that we have right here. Okay, so coterminal means that you're going to end up at the same terminal side. So same terminal side. So for instance, something that you guys normally deal with. So let's say that you guys are in Mr. Lee's classroom. Here's the door. Okay. Here is the back of the room. Here's the front where the whiteboard is. And here are the windows right over here. Okay. So let's say that I was originally facing the door. Okay. So right now I'm at 0 degrees. Okay. So for instance, if I rotate 180 degrees, I would be facing this way towards the windows. This is 180 degrees. Okay. Here's another scenario. Let's say I faced the door and then I turned 90 degrees. So that means I'm just turning a quarter of a circle, and now I'm facing upwards. Okay? And same thing here. What if I were to face the door at 0 degrees and I rotated 3/4 of a circle? So half a circle plus a quarter circle. Then I would be facing the front of the room, which is at 270 degrees. Okay, here's the last scenario. If I were to start by facing at the door and I spun in a full circle, where would I be facing? Would I be facing the front, the windows, the back, or the door? Press play when you're ready. If I'm facing the door and I spin in a full circle, a full 360, where would I be facing? Okay, so if I were to spin in a full circle, notice how I'm still ending up facing the door. So here's what we noticed. Okay, whether you're at 0 degrees or 360 degrees, you're still facing the door. So these two angles right here, although very different in value, right? They are coterminal because they're still facing in the same direction. Okay? So coterminal angles can look different, but you can end up in the same spot. Coterminal just means where you're going to end up. Okay? So here's what I mean. If I were to, let's say, let me squeeze in another page here. Okay, let's say I was facing 90 degrees. Okay, and we'll use the same room. Okay, we got the door, we got the front, we got the back, and we got the windows. Okay, and let's say, you know, by default you're facing the door, which is 0 degrees. If you were to turn 90 degrees, okay, you would be facing in the back direction because this is where 90 degrees is. Okay, here's another scenario. Let's say your friend was starting at the same door, but they turned 450 degrees. Okay, where would they end up facing? Would they be facing the front, the back, the door, the window? Think about that. And remember, we're going to go counterclockwise here. Okay, so here's what you guys have to understand. Going 450 degrees is like going in a full circle plus a little bit more. Actually, 450 is the same thing as going 360 and then going 90 degrees. So if I go in a full circle, this green guy is still facing the door to the right, and to travel another 90 degrees, this green guy would be also facing the back, just like his blue friend here. Okay, so here's what I'm getting at. 90 degrees and 450 degrees, although very different, these are coterminal angles because you end up in the same direction. Okay, so we're not so much focused on how much you spin, but more of where do you end up. Okay, so coterminal angles are kind of like reducing fractions. So for instance, you know, 1/2 or 2/4 or 5/10 or 50/100 or 40/80. All of these are written very differently. But if you reduce all of these fractions, these all come out to 1/2. So what am I trying to get at? Fractions, although looking very different, they have the same value. Okay? Kind of the same idea with coterminal angles. Okay, sometimes your angles are a little bit too large and you want to reduce it in a sense, or they're too small and you want to enlarge it in a sense. Okay, we're used to having angles that are somewhere in between 0 degrees all the way to 360. So our angle, we want to make sure that it's somewhere in between 0 and 360 degrees. Okay, now when we get anything, so let's say that this is 0 and 360 here, we want all of our angles to be in here because this is what we're used to. Now, what if you end up getting angles that are bigger than 360 or less than 0? Okay, and this is why you're learning coterminal angles. You want to be able to recapture this angle so that it's a value that you recognize. Okay, so for instance, let's say that we had 450 degrees. Okay, 450 degrees is somewhere beyond 360. So what we're going to do is we're either going to add or subtract 360 degrees. Because here's the logic. If you spin in a full circle, no matter what direction you're facing, if you spin in a circle, you should still be in the same direction. Okay? So for instance, if you were facing upper left here, and you spun in a full circle, you just still be facing in that same direction. Okay. Just one more example. If you were facing down and right, and you were to spin in a full circle, you should still end up facing the same direction. That's the idea of going in a circle, right? You always end up in the same spot. So what we're going to do here is we're going to kind of reduce this angle until it's something that we recognize. So there's no point in adding 360 because that just makes the angle larger, right? We want to make sure that the angle is somewhere in between 0 and 360. So if it's too large, we're going to subtract 360. And when you subtract that, you get 90 degrees, which is definitely something inside of 0 and 360. Okay. So we know it's something that's upward facing. We know it's something up here. Okay. So again, 90 and 450 are coterminal angles, and they end up in the same spot. Okay, so they're equivalent in a sense. Okay, let's do one more. So what if I gave you an angle? Let me go ahead and transfer this here. Okay, what if your angle was negative 210 degrees? Okay, so you're used to having an angle in between 0 and 360, but negative 210 is somewhere over here. So to bring it back into the blue zone, it doesn't make sense to subtract 360 because that'll just make us go further away. So what we're going to do here is if it's too small, we're going to add. In the last example, it was too large, so we subtracted. If it's too small, we add. Okay? And that's it. It's either adding or subtracting 360. This comes out to a positive 150 degrees, which is somewhere in here. So we know we're good. So 150 degrees is somewhere over here in quadrant 2. So that means negative 210 degrees, you end up in the same spot. So here's something that I'll talk about. What does it mean to have a negative angle? Okay, so positive means you're going in a counterclockwise motion. You're going against the clock. So negative 210 means that you're going clockwise. So I'll illustrate this here. If you're going clockwise 210 degrees, you're going 180 plus 30 more. So this right here is 210 degrees. Okay, but notice how we end up in the same, that's a terrible color. We end up in the same terminal side. So negative 210 degrees and 150 degrees, although they look very different, they're actually coterminal angles. Okay, and we're going to use that to our advantage later when we try to find out trig ratios. Okay, so the whole idea here is the big takeaway is if you don't have something within 0 and 360, you want to convert it until it is somewhere in between 0 and 360. Okay, and that is the concept of coterminal angles. So here we go. Here's example 1. Okay, find an angle theta coterminal to 788, where theta is somewhere in between 0 and 360. Okay? Okay, so you take a look at your angle, 788. All right? Is that too large or too small? Okay? That is definitely too large, right? 788 is somewhere to the right of 360. So whenever it's too large, you want to reduce it down. So what you do is you subtract 360. Okay? What you're going to end up getting here, I believe, is 428 degrees. Okay. Now, we want to make sure that our angle is somewhere between 0 and 360, but look, it's not in between yet. Okay, so what do? We keep reducing it by subtracting increments of 360. So we subtract this here. What do we get? I think this is 68 degrees. Okay, 68 degrees is definitely somewhere within 0 and 360. So this is your answer. But I want you guys to understand, 68 degrees, if I were to graph it, 68 degrees is somewhere in quadrant 1, because you're going clockwise 68 degrees. Stop somewhere here, because I know that this is 90, so you're not going to go all the way over there. Somewhere in between 0 and 90. But what I want you guys to do and understand is 68 and 428 degrees, and what we started with, 788 degrees, all look very different. But these are all coterminal. And what does that mean? You end up in the same spot. Okay? And that's it. All right? Let's try another one. Here's bar B. Same directions, but let's say I gave you 900 degrees. Go ahead and find coterminal angles such that the angle is somewhere between 0 and 360. Press play when you're ready. Okay, so 900 degrees is definitely too large, so we're going to subtract 360. Okay? This is definitely too large. Okay, so when we subtract it, we should get 540 degrees, but it's still not in between. So we do it again. So we subtract another 360. We keep subtracting until we get something in between 0 and 360, right? So this comes out to 180 degrees. Ding. That's definitely something in between 0 and 360. So just so you guys understand, 180 degrees is when you go counterclockwise and you stop over here. So this is 180 degrees. Okay? So 180 degrees is the same thing as 360 plus 180. That right there is 540 degrees. Okay? Or that's the same thing as going in 2 circles and then some. That is your 900 degrees. But notice how they all end up on the same terminal side. They're still facing left. Okay? So although these angles values are very different, they end up in the same spot. Okay? So that's why we call it coterminal angles, because they end up in the same spot. And that's it. All right, here's 2 more. Part C. What if your angle was negative 400 degrees? Okay. Remember, you're aiming for something in between 0 to 360. Negative 400 is somewhere over here. So the only way to get it somewhere in between, it wouldn't make sense to subtract 360 because that'll just make us go further to the left here. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to add, because we want to move towards the right here. We're going to add increments of 360. Different signs we subtract, we keep the sign of the larger number. This comes out to negative 40 degrees. Still not in between 0 and 360. Negative 40 is a little bit before 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep adding until we get something in between 0 and 360. So this comes out to 320 degrees. 320 degrees is definitely in between 0 and 360, so we know we're good. So 320 negative 40 degrees and negative 400 degrees are all the same thing. And I'll draw this here just so you can see it. 320 is somewhere right here in the fourth quadrant, because I know that this is 270. So 320 is somewhere in between 270 and 360. Okay, so here's 320. Negative 40 means you're going clockwise 40 degrees. Notice how you end up on the same terminal side. Okay, or if you decide to go clockwise in a full circle plus an extra 40, which is negative 400 degrees, notice how you still end up in that same terminal side. Okay, so big takeaway, if the angle is too large, you subtract 360. If the angle is too small, you keep adding 360. And you're going to keep going, maybe once or twice or 3 times, it depends, until you get something in between 0 and 360. So here's my last one. Let's say you had negative 120. Do this last one here, and then press play when you're ready. Okay, this one here is definitely too small. Okay, so if we want it somewhere in between 0 and 360, right, we want to make sure that we add 360. Different signs we subtract, we're going to get a positive 240 degrees there. And 240 is definitely somewhere in between 0 and 360, so we know we're good. So just to illustrate what's going on here, going clockwise 120 is the same thing as going counterclockwise 240. Notice how we still end up in the same terminal side. That is why these two angles are called coterminal angles. And why are they called that? Because you end up in the same spot. Hopefully you guys caught on to my repetition. That's basically it. Go over coterminal angles. Why is this so important? You're going to see this in the very next lesson on how we can actually take advantage of this concept. All right.